wondered why some people are blessed with many more years of life, while others leave this world much sooner? Why do certain men and women continue waking up each morning long after they have crossed 60, 70, or even 80 years of age? Is it simply because of good health? Or could there be a...
Many older believers quietly ask a question they rarely speak out loud. Lord, why am I still here? Some ask it with thankful hearts. Others whisper it through tears after losing friends, spouses, or family members. Some wonder whether their best years are already behind them. They look at their aging bodies, their slower steps, and the changing world around them, and begin to question whether their purpose has faded with time.
But heaven tells a completely different story. Our culture often celebrates youth. It praises speed, strength, and productivity, making many older people feel forgotten or unnecessary. Yet God has never measured a person's value by physical ability or youthful energy.
The fact that you are alive today is not an accident.
Purpose
Every sunrise you witness is evidence that your Creator still has a reason for your presence on this earth.
He has not finished
Behind this
writing their
simple
story.
question, why am I still alive, lies a profound spiritual mystery. God never extends a person's life without intention. His timing is always deliberate. His plans are never random. Whenever He allows someone to remain on earth longer than expected, He is preparing something that reaches far beyond that individual's own life.
Perhaps you've looked back and thought your greatest achievements belong to the past. Maybe you feel overlooked by society or believe your opportunities have already passed. But what if your most significant assignment has not been completed yet? What if the wisdom you have gathered through years of victories and failures is exactly what someone else desperately needs?
What if the prayers you've prayed, the tears you've shed, and the lessons you've learned are preparing you for a season of influence greater than anything you experienced in your younger years? The Bible reveals an incredible pattern. Whenever God preserved someone's life for many years, it was never meaningless. Consider Noah.
God allowed him to live through generations because the world needed a faithful man willing to stand for righteousness while everyone else followed corruption. Think about Moses. His long life wasn't merely a reward for faithfulness. God kept him because an entire nation needed someone mature enough to lead them through impossible circumstances. The wilderness demanded patience that only years of walking with God could produce. Then there was Anna, the elderly prophetess.
For decades, she faithfully worshipped in the temple. Many may have assumed her life had become ordinary, yet God preserved her until the exact moment she could witness the arrival of the promised Messiah. Her greatest purpose was fulfilled near the end of her life, not at the beginning. These stories reveal a powerful truth. When God extends a person's years, He is often preparing them for an assignment that younger versions of themselves could never have carried. Time shapes people. It teaches humility. It deepens compassion. It builds endurance. Most importantly, it creates wisdom that cannot be learned from books alone. Experience leaves behind treasures that no classroom can provide. Every hardship survived, every prayer answered, every disappointment endured, and every victory won becomes part of a testimony that God can use to strengthen someone else. That is why the elderly are far more than people with memories. They are living libraries of God's faithfulness. They carry lessons purchased through decades of trusting Him in seasons of joy and seasons of pain. Sadly, many never recognize this. Instead of seeing age as preparation, they see it as decline. Instead of expecting new purpose, they expect the story to end. But Scripture teaches something very different. Many of God's deepest works happen after a lifetime of preparation. As people grow older, Their hearts often become more sensitive to God's voice. Pride slowly loses its grip. Earthly ambitions begin to fade. Eternal things become clearer than ever before. The years that appear quieter on the outside are often the years when God is doing his greatest work within.
That is why periods of silence should never be mistaken for abandonment. Perhaps you've prayed and felt that heaven seemed unusually quiet. Maybe you once sensed God's direction clearly, but now wonder why everything feels still. Don't confuse silence with absence. Sometimes God becomes quiet because he is preparing you for something greater than you can presently imagine. Throughout Scripture, seasons of stillness often came before seasons of extraordinary purpose. God shapes his servants in hidden places before revealing their assignments to the world.
The waiting season is not wasted. It is preparation. Every delay, every unanswered question, and every quiet moment is forming a deeper trust that cannot be built during times of constant activity. And perhaps that is exactly where you are today. Maybe you believe your usefulness has ended simply because your strength has changed. But what if God sees your life completely differently? What if he has been preserving you because your greatest influence is about to begin? What if someone you've never met is waiting for the encouragement only your story can provide? What if an entire family will be transformed because of one conversation, one prayer, or one act of obedience from someone who thought their best years were already behind them? To understand this truth more clearly, let me share the story of an elderly man whose life seemed ordinary until one unexpected day revealed the very reason God had kept him alive. His name was Elias. Elias was 74 years old. He lived in a small village surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests, far from the noise of busy towns. Life there moved slowly. The seasons came and went, children grew up and moved away, and one by one, the friends who had once filled his days were gone. His little wooden cottage stood at the edge of the village, overlooking the mountains. Every evening, he would sit on a worn bench outside his home, watching the sun disappear beyond the horizon. As the sky darkened, one question often filled his heart. Lord, why have you left me here? Years earlier, Elias had been known as one of the village's finest blacksmiths. His hands were strong enough to shape glowing iron into farming tools, wagon wheels, gates, and everything a growing community needed. People respected his craftsmanship. They sought his advice. His days were filled with purpose. But time changes everyone. Now, his hands shook when he tried to hold heavy tools. His back no longer allowed him to stand for long hours beside the fire. The workshop that had once echoed with the sound of hammers had become almost silent. He wondered if his usefulness had disappeared along with his strength. Every night he prayed the same simple prayer. Father, if my work is finished, help me understand why you still keep me here. There was never an immediate answer, only silence. But sometimes God's silence is not his absence. Sometimes it is the beginning of a new chapter that we cannot yet see. One morning, Elias awoke with an unusual feeling deep inside his spirit. There were no dramatic visions, no thunder from heaven, no audible voice. Only a quiet impression that refused to leave him. He felt drawn toward a narrow trail that wound through the forest behind his home. He had walked that path countless times throughout his life, yet this day felt different. Taking his old wooden walking stick, he stepped outside and slowly followed the trail. The forest welcomed him with gentle bird song and the rustling of leaves dancing in the breeze. Sunlight filtered through the tall trees, painting patches of gold across the ground. As he walked, a strange peace settled over him. Nearly an hour passed before he heard something unexpected. At first, it sounded like the cry of a small animal. He stopped. The sound came again. This time, it was unmistakable. Someone was crying. Following the faint sobs, Elias stepped off the path and carefully pushed through the trees until he reached a small clearing. There, sitting alone on the ground, was a young boy, no older than 12. His face was buried in his arms. His shoulders shook with every quiet sob. Elias approached slowly, making sure not to frighten him.
"My son," he said gently, "are you hurt?" The boy quickly wiped his eyes. "No, I'm just lost." There was something deeper behind those words. Elias could hear it immediately. This child wasn't only lost in the forest, he was carrying a much heavier burden. Kneeling beside him, Elias smiled kindly. "My name is Elias. What is yours?" "Micah," the boy answered softly. Elias noticed a backpack lying nearby, covered with dirt and leaves. After a few moments of silence, Micah finally began to speak. He explained that life at home had become unbearable. For weeks, his parents had argued almost every day. The shouting never seemed to stop. Feeling invisible and overwhelmed, he had wandered into the forest, hoping to escape the pain for a little while. But he had walked farther than he realized. Now he had no idea how to return home. Elias listened without interrupting. He didn't rush to give advice. He didn't offer quick answers. Years of walking with God had taught him something important. People heal faster when they first feel heard. So he allowed the boy to empty his heart completely. Only after the silence settled did Elias quietly speak. "Micah," he said, "when I was about your age, my home wasn't peaceful either." The boy looked up with surprise. "I know what it feels like to believe no one notices your pain. I also know what it feels like to think running away will make it better." He paused before continuing. "But I learned something over the years. No matter how alone you feel, God never stops seeing you." Those words landed differently than any lecture the boy had ever heard. Why? Because they weren't spoken from theory. They came from experience. Every sentence carried the weight of decades spent trusting God through hardship, disappointment, loss, and restoration. Micah could sense the difference. Elias wasn't speaking like someone repeating verses from memory. He was speaking like a man who had lived every word. After resting for a while, Elias stood and held out his hand. "Come," he said with a warm smile. "Let's find your way home together." Without hesitation, Micah took the old man's hand. Slowly, they began walking back through the forest. The journey was unhurried. Along the way, Elias shared pieces of his own life. He spoke about mistakes he wished he had never made. He talked about seasons when he doubted God. He described moments when the Lord carried him through grief he never thought he could survive. He explained how forgiveness had changed his heart and how faith had given him hope even when every circumstance seemed hopeless. Micah listened carefully. For the first time in a long while, his heart felt lighter. He wasn't simply hearing another story. He was witnessing what a lifetime of walking with God could produce. As the village finally came into view, they noticed several people searching desperately along the roads. Among them were Micah's parents.
The moment they saw their son, they ran toward him with tears streaming down their faces. They embraced him tightly, apologizing for the pain their constant arguments had caused. Watching from a distance, Elias quietly thanked God. Micah's father soon walked over to him. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Sir, thank you for bringing our son back." Elias smiled gently and shook his head. "I only followed the path God placed before me." But neither of them realized that this simple walk through the forest was only the beginning. God had arranged this meeting for a much greater purpose than anyone could yet understand. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Micah began visiting Elias almost every afternoon. At first, he came simply to say thank you, but before long, those short visits turned into long conversations. Sometimes they sat on the wooden bench outside the old cottage, watching the evening sky change colors. Other days, they walked slowly through the forest trails where they had first met. Micah asked endless questions. How did you learn to trust God when life was difficult? Were you ever afraid? Did you ever feel like giving up? Elias answered each question honestly. He never pretended his life had been easy. He spoke about failures he regretted, prayers that seemed unanswered, loved ones he had buried, and seasons when his faith was tested beyond what he thought he could endure. Yet every story ended with the same conclusion. God remained faithful. One afternoon, Micah arrived carrying a small notebook. Elias smiled. "What is that for?" The boy looked down shyly before answering. "I don't want to forget what you're teaching me. I've started writing down everything you say." The old man's eyes filled with tears. For years, he had believed his life had become invisible. He thought people only noticed what he could no longer do. Yet here stood a young boy who valued not the strength of his hands, but the wisdom of his heart. At that moment, something awakened inside Elias. Perhaps his greatest work had never been making tools from iron. Perhaps God had been shaping something far more valuable all along, a life capable of shaping people. As the months passed, others noticed the remarkable change in Micah. The fearful boy who once hid in the forest became peaceful, confident, and compassionate. His teachers saw the difference. Neighbors noticed it. Most importantly, his parents saw it. Their home slowly became a place of healing instead of constant conflict. His father sought forgiveness for his anger. His mother found renewed hope. Together, they began rebuilding the family they thought was beyond repair. One evening, Micah's father visited Elias himself. He thanked him not only for helping find his son, but for helping restore their entire family. Word quietly spread throughout the village. Soon another young man came asking for advice. Then a widow asked Elias to pray with her. A struggling husband sought his counsel. Children gathered just to hear his stories. Even travelers passing through the village stopped at his small home after hearing about the wise old man who always seemed to know the right words to say. The workshop that had once echoed with the sound of hammers was now filled with something even greater: laughter, prayer, hope, healing. Elias' home became a refuge where weary hearts found encouragement. One peaceful evening, as the setting sun painted the mountains with shades of gold and crimson, Elias sat quietly outside his home. The gentle breeze reminded him of the morning God had led him into the forest. For the first time in many years, he understood. The answer he had prayed for night after night had finally arrived. Looking toward heaven, he whispered softly, "Lord, now I understand. You didn't preserve my life because you needed my strength. You preserved me because someone needed my experience."
My greatest assignment wasn't building things with my hands. It was building people with the wisdom you gave me. Tears rolled down his weathered face as another truth settled deep within his heart. Youth often builds. Age often restores. The young possess energy that can move mountains, but those who have walked with God for decades possess something equally powerful: discernment. They recognize dangers before others see them. They notice opportunities others overlook. They speak fewer words, but each one carries the weight of
Experience. That evening, Elias realized his purpose had never ended. It had simply changed. God had not extended his years so he could relive yesterday. He had preserved him so someone else's tomorrow could be transformed. That truth echoes throughout the pages of Scripture. The Bible never presents old age as a season without purpose. Instead, it repeatedly honors those whose later years become their most spiritually significant. Psalm 92 declares that the righteous will continue to bear fruit even in old age. Notice what that verse does not say. It doesn't promise physical strength equal to youth. It doesn't suggest life becomes easier. Instead, it promises lasting fruitfulness. God never intended his faithful servants to become spiritually inactive simply because they grew older.
Their fruit changes, their influence deepens, their legacy expands. Likewise, Proverbs teaches that gray hair is like a crown of honor when it is accompanied by a life lived in righteousness. In God's eyes, every wrinkle tells a story. Every scar represents a battle survived. Every year becomes evidence of his sustaining grace. Sadly, society often measures people by speed, appearance, and productivity. God measures them by faithfulness. The world may admire those who rise quickly. Heaven honors those who endure faithfully. As people grow older, something beautiful often happens. Life strips away unnecessary distractions. The pursuit of status becomes less important. Pride loses its grip. The heart begins focusing on what truly lasts.
That is why many older believers naturally become mentors, encouragers, intercessors, and spiritual parents. They have learned lessons that cannot be taught inside a classroom. They've watched God answer impossible prayers. They've survived storms that once seemed certain to destroy them. Because of that, their words carry credibility. Their testimony becomes living evidence that God's promises never fail. Scripture gives us remarkable examples. Anna spent decades worshiping faithfully before witnessing the arrival of Jesus. Moses was still leading God's people at 120 years old. Caleb, even in his 80s, refused to surrender his faith because he believed God's promises were still true. None of these men and women viewed old age as the conclusion of purpose. It became the platform from which God revealed some of his greatest works. Perhaps that is why God allows certain people to live longer than they ever expected. Not because he has forgotten them, not because he has delayed their purpose, but because someone, somewhere, still needs what only a lifetime of walking with him can produce.
If you have ever believed that your best years are behind you, I want you to hear this truth with an open heart. God never measures your usefulness by your age. He measures it by your willingness to let him work through you. The world may look at an elderly person and see fading strength, slower steps, or retirement from active work. But God sees something entirely different. He sees a life refined by experience, strengthened through trials, and shaped by years of faithful obedience. Every challenge you have survived
has prepared you for someone else's breakthrough. Every prayer you have prayed has strengthened your faith. Every tear you have shed has deepened your compassion.
Nothing you have experienced has been wasted. The pain that once seemed meaningless has become part of your testimony. The disappointments that almost broke you have become lessons that can strengthen another weary heart. Even your failures, when surrendered to God, become reminders of His mercy and grace. That is why your story matters. Someone who is struggling today may find hope because you chose to share what God brought you through. Someone who feels abandoned may discover courage because they hear how God remained faithful in your darkest season. Someone standing at the edge of giving up
May continue walking because your testimony reminds them that God finishes what He starts. Never underestimate the influence of a faithful life. Many of the greatest spiritual victories never happen on a stage or before a crowd. Some happen in quiet conversations. Some happen through simple prayers offered behind closed doors. Some happen when a grandparent kneels beside a child and teaches them how to trust God. Others happen when an older believer encourages someone who feels hopeless. These moments may seem small in the eyes of the world, but heaven sees every one of them. God has always used ordinary acts of obedience to accomplish extraordinary purposes. A gentle word can restore a broken heart. A sincere prayer can change the direction of an entire family. A lifetime of wisdom shared with humility can shape generations that the speaker may never even meet. That is the beauty of God's kingdom. Influence is not measured by popularity.
It is measured by faithfulness. Think again about Elias. For years, he believed his usefulness had ended. He assumed the silence in his life meant God had finished with him. Yet all along, the Lord was preparing him for the assignment that would leave the deepest impact. Had Elias ignored that gentle prompting to walk through the forest, Micah might never have found hope.
Had Elias ignored that gentle prompting to walk through the forest, Micah might never have found hope. A hurting family might never have been restored. An entire village might never have discovered the quiet wisdom hidden inside an old man who thought his purpose was over. One simple act of obedience changed countless lives. That is often how God works. He rarely reveals the full picture before asking us to take the first step. He simply invites us to trust Him. Perhaps today you are standing where Elias once stood.
You have questions. You wonder why God has allowed you to remain in this season of life. You may feel overlooked, forgotten, or uncertain about your future. But remember this: as long as God gives you breath, He still has a purpose for your life. Your calling may not look the same as it did years ago. Your assignment may have changed, but it has not disappeared. Maybe your mission today is to mentor someone younger. Maybe it is to strengthen your family through prayer. Maybe it is to encourage a friend who has lost hope.
Maybe it is simply to remain faithful so others can see what a life devoted to Christ truly looks like. Whatever your assignment is, it still matters. Never believe the lie that your value decreases with age. Purpose is not found in physical strength. Purpose is found in a heart that continues saying, "Lord, use me." The strongest voices are not always the loudest. Often they belong to those who have quietly walked with God for many years. Their confidence comes from experience. Their peace comes from trust. Their wisdom comes from a lifetime of watching God keep His promises. And that wisdom is desperately needed in every generation.
Young people need examples of steadfast faith. Families need spiritual anchors. Communities need people whose lives point others toward God's truth. That is why heaven
treasures faithful men and women who continue serving long after the world assumes they are finished. God is not preserving your life by accident. He is preserving your influence. He is preserving your testimony. He is preserving your prayers. He is preserving your wisdom, because someone, somewhere, still needs what He has been building inside you throughout the years. So don't focus on what you can no longer do. Focus on what God can still accomplish through you. Instead of looking at your age as a limitation, see it as evidence of God's sustaining grace. Instead of mourning seasons that have passed, prepare your heart for the opportunities still ahead. God has not abandoned you. He has been preparing you. And just as He used Noah, Moses, Anna, Caleb, and countless faithful believers throughout history, He can continue using every person who places their trust in Him. No season of faithful obedience is ever wasted. No prayer offered in faith is ignored.
No life surrendered to God is without eternal significance. So walk into each new day with confidence. Speak words that encourage. Pray with expectation. Share your testimony without fear. Love generously. Forgive freely. Remain faithful until the very end. Because the greatest legacy you leave behind will never be measured by wealth, achievements, or recognition. It will be measured by the lives that were changed because you allowed God to work through you.